All right, everyone. It is 2024, January 1st, 2024. Welcome to the new year. Welcome to Outside the Studio. I have some announcements to make. We're going to change things up a little bit this year. We're going to do things a little bit differently. There are many reasons for this, which I don't know that I'll bore you with those details, but I'm excited for this new format. And I'm excited for this particular episode. We're going to talk a little bit about it before we go into it. But before we go there, I want to introduce a very special person that works on the podcast with me behind the scenes, and without which I could not do this show. Jamie Conway is our writer of show notes and helps me produce this amazing content. Jamie is an amazing artist in her own right, so I'm excited for her to get her name out in the world and share her artwork with you all. And she's also an amazing barista extraordinaire, and she's a very talented violinist. Is it violinist or violinist?
Violinist, yeah.
Okay, I said it right the first time. And a rock climber and a fellow adventurer. She and I go backpacking together. And yeah, Jamie, welcome to the show. Welcome to this side of the show. How does it feel to be here?
Thank you. It feels great. That's I'm so honored by the lengthy list of adjectives and accomplishments I have. I feel very, very, very honored to make it onto the show.
They're all true things. Yeah.
It's true. I know.
We're honored to have you. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Oh, anything I want to add? No, other than I enjoy being able to work in the backgrounds of the show and be able to feel like I'm a part of it, writing the notes and everything. So we have a good time.
Yeah. You come up with the best titles. So Jamie, I'll just give you a little bit of background. Jamie will often give me like 3 or 4 titles to choose from. And it takes me probably an hour to decide on a title because I just love them all.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like it's kind of the most fun part for me because it's the whole point is to help grab the attention a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I feel like sometimes I like to throw in maybe either a pun or a joke sometimes. Like I remember for one title, it was on paper tigers. And I think I came up with a title that was like lions and bears and paper tigers oh my. And I was like, oh, this is like a fun part of it, so you're able to have some fun.
Totally. I love that. I love your creativity. And I'm glad you take it and run with it because it's fun. I don't want this podcast to be something that feels like, gotcha with this title. I'm going to learn how to change my life in the next 30 minutes and everything's going to be, better and I'm never going to have any issues. I want it to be like real life stuff and fun and charming. And so you help make that possible. So thank you, Jamie.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
And we have one other very special guest joining us. Well, this is basically like y'all get to see the background of this team, the team that makes this podcast happen. It's not just me. I think I've mentioned that before, but we also have a very talented sound editor and producer. So he makes me sound better and our guests sound better. He takes out all the ums and awkward silences and loud dog barking background noises. And he's also taught me how to have a podcast. So literally wouldn't be able to do this without him. And that is Ernie Conway. Ernie, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Cool.
Yeah, it is excellent. So happy team outside the studio. Happy 2024.
We made it.
We made it through 2023. I'm curious if you have any so somebody asked me this a few weeks ago, if I had an intention for 2024. And then Jamie, you asked me yesterday, are you into New Year's resolutions? And I'm not really lately, but I do like the idea of a word or an intention or something like that I want to remind myself of throughout the year. So I have that in mind, but I'm curious to hear from you too, if you have any intentions, resolutions, anything you want to share.
I'm not really into New Year's resolutions just because I feel like, it's a great, little bit of inspiration, bringing in the new year with a new change. But I feel like you should just always be having a resolution or a plan of some sort of how you're growing and everything. So I don't really like to do them just because I feel like I already started a new thing 2 weeks ago. So it's I'm just always going to have that rhythm of a new plan or changing something up. But I think for an intention, I was thinking about that like this morning, I was like, someone mentioned that they kind of just want to explore everything, and I was like, oh, the intention of everything is kind of like a cool intention, not in a like I feel like I have to do everything, but like having like the energy and curiosity to just like try everything, because I feel like get stuck in choice paralysis pretty often, and I feel like I have to choose one, and it's like, well, I could try all of them, just a little dabble. So dabbling maybe, or like everything is kind of like my intention or goal going into the new year.
I love that. Dabble is such a good word.
Yeah, I feel like that's a fun one.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah,
Jamie.
yeah.
What
So
about you, Ernie?
I was thinking, like what Jamie said about the podcast. Was it? I think I want to say it was 2 years ago. Somebody had you interviewed someone and you asked them, and they said they didn't do resolutions because New Year's resolutions fail, but intentions, like Jamie said, work because you think about changing something for the year as opposed to a resolution and you're all gun ho. And it doesn't seem to be the same thing. So
Yeah.
I like intention, and I need to slow down and think before I speak. Got to be a little clearer. I put a lot of pressure on myself to do a lot of things and get a lot of things done. So I feel like I'm often running around, and I think in the end, probably don't need to do that. So I can take a little more time and just and probably set better priorities. Well, is this really important? Is it fun to do? Would I like to do it? And put it in different categories. Because I think there's just so much to do. And I think like anybody with a bucket list. I think it was one of the, now I don't, there's all these sayings from all these great people you interviewed, and I don't remember them, but there was another one about you could never empty your bucket list because there are always things to do, and you're going to run out of time for what you want to do, like reading books and things. So I just need to organize, prioritize.
I like that. Organize and prioritize. There's something about making lists when you say organize and prioritize. I don't know if you guys like make to-do lists, but what's been helpful for me in terms of being able to prioritize and slow down and choose more intentionally about how I want to spend my time on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis is constantly making lists. And then what I'll do at night is I'll check, or throughout the day, I'll like check off the things that I've done, and I'll kind of rearrange that list of priorities for the next day, or maybe it's the next week. And so it's always kind of like this running, living, breathing list of things I want to do. And I notice too that sometimes I'm like, I haven't done that, and it's been a couple of weeks, and now I'm realizing it's just not a priority. Like if I haven't done it in a couple of weeks, it's just not going to get done, and it doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, not everything matters. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the subject of our podcast episode today, which is sobriety isn't the right word, but it's this idea of being sober curious. I mean, it's dry January for a lot of people, so a lot of folks are interested in this idea of living life without alcohol. Can I? Should I? What qualifies as something that's an issue enough to see if we can do without it. I think this is across the board with any kind of an addiction that you think you may or may not have a problem with. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It doesn't have to be drugs. But I like this idea of framing it in the way that can we be curious about it? And that also allows for this idea that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's definitely not black and white. And it also doesn't mean that, if I'm sober curious, it doesn't mean that I have a problem or an issue with alcohol. It might be just this is the way I've been thinking about it. It's like an inquiry into your relationship with a substance. Now, I could apply that to coffee. I could apply it to chocolate. I could apply it to peanut butter. I could apply it to apples. Okay. So there's like so many different things we have relationships with that I would invite us to be a little bit more curious about. Certainly you can apply it to any relationship, any human contact relationship you have in your life that may or may not be working that you want to get curious about. So There's a lot of really interesting threads that Amanda and I talk about, and one of them is that alcohol doesn't, at least for Amanda and her story, it didn't have to be necessarily a problem. Like she didn't identify as having an addiction or dependency on alcohol for her to find it being a problem in her life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that said, I'm curious about now. I also wanted to mention too that that's my intention for this year, curiosity. And this idea that whatever it is that I'm approaching and doing and exploring is, I want to put on my curiosity hat. I want to be interested and learn things and be a little bit more open-minded in terms of exploring. So what does this bring up for you too? I mean, I know that the three of us love to drink beer. Like we seem to have a symbiotic relationship with alcohol. But if I were to say to you, hey, do you want to try dry January with me? What would you two say to me, say to that?
I'd be down. Yeah. And I feel like it's because like when we do hang out, like whenever we do like drink like a beer or anything like that, it's usually like we're there to meet up and have community. Like it's more that the alcohol is just like there. It's not like the basis of our community because I feel like we're already like having like group conversations and going out and adventuring together. So it's, whenever we do hang out, it doesn't revolve around it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Cool. Jamie, a follow-up question to that. Does it feel like emotional in any way? Like, does it feel like that might be kind of boring, or I feel a little bit scared about that? Or what about in other situations, like going out at night with my friends? If you were going to say, I'm doing dry January, do you have any
Totally.
sort of like fear around it?
Not. I mean, for myself, no, because like I feel totally comfortable like going out into a group setting or hanging out with people and like not like drinking. Like it's something that I don't feel like I am socially dependent on. Being like younger, I guess I could see like that maybe like feeling like because like I'm in my early 20s, people like having like but it's just a drink or something, or like it just like it's much more common among like younger people to drink. But like even then, I wouldn't be like afraid of like being socially ostracized. Like I think like people would be like, okay, great. I don't feel like it'd be like a really big deal, at least in my social setting, at least with my crowd.
Sounds like you have a good crowd. That's good.
I do.
I'm
I have a
happy to
great
hear
crowd.
it.
Yeah.
Ernie, what do you think?
It's an interesting. I was thinking the follow up question was interesting. I would be okay with that. Like I'm going to do a dry January. I would personally frame it a little different because, and again, I think it goes with the earlier question about intention, New Year's resolution. I would like to see how I would feel without it. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm gonna try a month without drinking. I'm going to try a month of watching what I eat and drink. And sometimes people they get kind of, but maybe it's different with like Jamie's group, or I think of some of the friends I have. They're always a little they get really overcautious, or they try to be really careful, or like, oh, he can't drink this time, and it changes their perspective as opposed to, hey, you know what, I'm going to try like protein shake every day for breakfast. I'm going to try and not have any alcohol after 5 p.m. And people seem to be a little more understanding than just saying stop, because then they also kind of like, what's going on, right? And so I wonder sometimes from mindset if it also helps. And I could walk away, because when I was younger, I got a little carried away and I would have to stop. I would just have to stop and not go. And it would be a couple of months. And then I would come back and I'd be like, okay. And then I'd have a couple and then kind of work my way up, and I'd get a little overzealous. And then I would have to stop and I would go again. So
when you were stopping for a couple of months, Ernie, did you feel like you had to separate yourself from a group of people that you would normally drink with, or certain social settings? What kind of support did you have in place to help you stop cold turkey like that?
I was younger, and
I realized that I had just overdone it, right? I would come home and I'd be like, not sure what happened yesterday. Or I know that that was just a little too much. And so I would just stop, but it was more me, and I wouldn't go. Like if they wanted to, and we didn't, I'm thinking about it. We didn't usually go to somebody's house. It was always like in a public social setting. So I would be like, hey, I got to go home, or pretty busy tonight. Can't make that party. And that's kind of what I did. And I'd kind of walk away for a little while, but I didn't really have a support group. I didn't have anybody I'd say, hey, you know what? I kind of overdid it yesterday, and so I'm going to stop for a while.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. It was pretty much on my own, but I just realized I needed to walk away because I could see myself going overboard too far.
Yeah. I mean, it's good that at a young age you had that recognition that you needed to take a break and that you're able to. I think so many of us can let that habit become a problem or an issue, and it can just, it's like that neuro pathway gets deeper and deeper and harder to change the older you get if you don't kind of address it and take breaks over time. So I think that's what I love about the intention of curiosity is like that lets it be a little bit more kind of like what you were saying, Ernie, about, well, can it be like, I'm going to experiment with having a protein shake for breakfast every morning and not, I'm going to experiment with drinking after 5. So it's not like this hard and fast rule of I can't do this, I won't do that. So it just leaves a little bit more compassion for yourself and a little bit more leniency for yourself to go through that process. So one other question I have, and then I want to let listeners jump into this juicy podcast episode, is the other subject that Amanda and I touch on that I'm so passionate about, that both of you know and also are passionate about, is reading. I love books. And I've just gotten done reading a couple of really good ones, and I just started a new book, and I always have to have a stack of books on my bed, otherwise I get anxious. And so I'm wondering if you're reading anything good, looking forward to reading anything good. What's on your nightstand these days?
I'm reading a book called Far from the Madding Crowd right now. It's a like late 1800s book. I'm reading it because I saw the movie and I was like, oh, this is a beautiful movie. And I'm trying to read like all the classics. And I just got done reading Brave New World, and I was like, this is a depressing book with an unhappy ending. And so I was like, I'm just going to read a super simple farm themed, like basically like wholesome love story about how like, it's like the late 1800s. So it's about this woman who's like really independent, and she like declines marriage proposals, and she's like, I own a farm. But then it's like a sweet story. And I was like, this sounds like a breath of fresh air compared to, Brave New World. So
a scary apocalyptic future that half
literally
of it already happened.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, let's just do a
Cool. Say the title again, Jamie.
Far from the Madding Crowd.
Oh, Far from the Madding Crowd. Yes, that is a movie. That's a 90s. When was that?
I think it was like 2010s, but yeah, but it's really well done. Like it's pretty beautiful. So
okay, cool. Well, maybe I'll borrow that one from you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you. Ernie, what are you reading?
I have a hard time sitting down and reading because I feel, it's my own opinion, but I'm a slow reader with a high retention, so it takes me a long time to get through things. So I do audiobooks. And I like a lot of nonfiction, a lot of history, especially during World War II. My dad grew up in the Depression, and he served for a little while, so I'm always kind of fascinated by how people make changes and the impact. Also, a lot of in a code. I'm a code guy. I like to talk about codes and ciphers and things like that. And so how one country cracked another one and what it did to the impact. And there's a lot of great stories about women who were just at home or going through life, and then all of a sudden this war comes out and it changes the entire dynamic of the country and the workforce, and they stepped up and made huge contributions and cracked codes and were part of all these things. And so I love those stories that sometimes get forgotten, because as soon as the war was done, in some cases, like the very next week, they were done. They were discharged. So I like those, but then I also border on the whimsical, and I like some of the other ones. I'm listening to The Lost Child right now, to kind of go back and forth. And then I just finished Geddy Lee's My Effin' Life, because I'm a big Rush fan, and kind of fascinated by his view on how the band went and what it was like to be friends for 40 years in the same career.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a nice wide variety of books we've got going. Thanks, you guys. Okay, so last thing I want to say is that we are changing. I mentioned at the very beginning of this introduction that we're changing the format of the podcast. So I will tell you briefly what that means. Instead of, I was kind of going back and forth about taking a sabbatical from outside the studio. Instead of that, we are going to produce one podcast per month this year. See how that goes. So kind of peeling it back to the roots of outside the studio. That's actually how I started. And then we started producing 2 times a month. And now lately it's been every Monday. And I am just going to experiment with a new format of Ernie and Jamie are going to join me for an introduction. We'll talk briefly about the theme of the podcast, and then we will have the podcast itself. So yeah. Anything you two want to add to that introduction? Anything else you would like to say, you want listeners to know? Yeah.
Nothing like specific, but I'm excited to like be a part of the show, on this side. Never been on a podcast before, so I'm like, I don't know, the conversation's always fun. I think it's cool to be able to be in on it.
We're happy to have you, Jamie. You're such a talented, creative person, so I'm lucky that you're here. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like the variety of guests that you have, Tessa, and how it's such a wide range of people. And I think as a whole, what I like is that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, in all of the podcasts we've done, 122 now?
Yeah, this is
that
123.
they've said this is the only way. They've never said that. I like that people will say, this is what's going on, and this works for me. And it's like you were saying about the all or nothing, with Amanda's view on drinking. She didn't say everybody needs to do it. She didn't say this is the only way. She just said, this is what I do and it works for me. And I think that's a theme that you're really good at finding from the guests, because they take the one thing that works for them and they share it and say, this is something I do and it works for me, and maybe it'll work for you. And I love that they respect that so much, that they don't, this is how it's done and it's the only way. It's a beautiful thing to see you be able to bring them out and say, I just like to share this thing that works for me with all of your guests or all of your audience.
Thanks. Yeah, I love that about anything I read or listen to or watch. It's like there's always, I think that's what originally drew me to reading so intensely, is that I always felt like I had something to learn about the world. And maybe I didn't resonate with all of the characters in every single facet, but I always felt like, well, that's an interesting perspective. And I could see that side of the story, and I can see how that would work for them. Maybe this aspect will work for me, and so I'll try it, which now I'm realizing has very much to do with the theme of curiosity. So I guess I've always had that within me from a young age. All right, so that's it. That's the new format. Once a month, every Monday, every first Monday of the month, we will publish a podcast, and they will be meaty and juicy. We have a lot of really cool guests coming up. I'm so excited to invite my friend Matt Monroe on the show next month. He's like the mushroom guy. I think that's actually his name, right, Jamie? What do we call him? The mushroom guy?
Basically, yeah. I don't think he's in love with that title I think you mentioned, but like I
You're
think
right.
it fits him. It fits him pretty good.
Yeah. So it's a fun episode. It's a longer one. Maybe we'll break it up into 2 parts. Maybe not. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, get ready for some really good recipes, some fun episodes, and an eclectic, as ever, bunch of very talented, smart people. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy this episode with Amanda. Hello, everyone. Happy January. Happy dry January if you're participating. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about dry January today. I want to quick disclaimer that I would like this to be a conversation. And as you're listening, I'd like this to be an invitation to be curious and interested rather than feeling like, there's shame and there's guilt around it. And certainly I think in our culture, it's easy to go that route when we're talking about things like alcohol and sobriety. So I love this term, and I'm not sure where this term came from, but the term is sober curious. And so our amazing guest today is Amanda. Amanda, I didn't ask you to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry. Is it Kuda?
It's Kuda, yes.
Okay. Good. I got it right. Hooray. I just want to read you this little blurb because I think when I read it, I so resonated with it. And it's just a little bit of background about Amanda, and then we'll let Amanda take it away. So Amanda can attest to the fact that you don't need to have a drinking problem for alcohol to be holding you back. Like a lot of successful young professionals, her life was a carousel of opportunities to drink that ultimately left her feeling unfulfilled in her spirit, relationships, and career. She didn't hit rock bottom or need a recovery program, but she did need a change. And so we're going to talk about her experimenting with dry January today, and how that sounds like changed the course of your life, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
And then congrats on your book, which came out in October of last year, 2023, Unbottled Potential, Break Up with Alcohol and Break Through to Your Best Life.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, what do you want to add to that? Anything?
Yeah, I thank you for, I always try to give that disclaimer up front because I know we're speaking to a broad audience who is interested in wellness and personal development and all of these beautiful things. And the conversation around alcohol has a lot of stigma and confrontation around it. And so I just want to be clear that, we're not here to shame anyone or make their habits wrong. It's about expanding you into a new way of thinking and helping you to see the possibilities and the opportunities that might be available to you if you might decide to change your relationship with alcohol, change how you think about alcohol, just take a simple break from alcohol. And I think that it has been one of, if not the most powerful and transformative lesson and adventure that I've taken on in my life. And it was 100% unplanned. So I'm excited to kind of dig into how I got started in this path as well today.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions specifically around how you got started. And I was curious to hear, I think it gives us a good broad brushstroke, what I just read about your discovery of Sober Curious and Dry January. But could you explain in a little bit more detail what your specific experience was and your specific relationship with alcohol was prior to this? It sounds like life-changing experiment.
Yeah. So as we speak, I've been alcohol-free since January 1st, 2017. So 7 years, which is wild. And before that, I was a run-of-the-mill social kind of party girl drinker. I mostly drank on the weekends, Friday night happy hour through the weekend. And there was nothing, I started drinking in my late teens, early 20s. There was nothing really that awe-inspiring about my relationship with alcohol. I partied in college and, kind of tried to class it up as I graduated and went into my big kid job and really kind of converted more to happy hours and trying to drink wine and cocktails instead of, drinking out of a random cooler in the basement of a frat party. So I kind of elevated my drinking throughout my 20s, but in terms of what I was drinking and where I was drinking. But the thing remained that alcohol was a huge staple of my social life. And I really believed that I needed it to be social, to be cool, to be relaxed, to loosen up. I needed it to be flirtatious in my romantic life. And I needed it to relax, and I deserved it to relax after a long, hard week of work. And so these are stories that I don't think anyone would be like, oh my gosh, that's so wild. How crazy of you. They're just like everyone's normal relationship with alcohol. And so sometime in my late 20s to early 30s, I was recovering from a very, very heartbreaking romantic breakup. And I started on this path of personal development and got introduced to some new age spirituality and kind of the self-help world. And I really fell into that and thought, wow, this is it. I found the ticket. But there was something, Tessa, that didn't click. It was like I was doing all of those self-help, personal development, spirituality things. I was journaling, I was meditating, I was affirmation saying, I was doing everything that was prescribed to me. And it felt better, but not like as good as it was described. And so I couldn't help but wonder if there was something I was missing or doing wrong, or if God forbid that I was like cursed and this stuff just didn't work for me. And what I finally landed on was it wasn't so much about how many things, amazing things I was adding to my life, because I had kind of hit critical mass when it came to, could I do more good stuff? What it came down to is there anything that I wouldn't say bad, but is there anything suboptimal that I was doing in my life that might have been detracting from my ability to achieve and live this happy life that I wanted? And I kept landing on alcohol, Tessa. And I did not want that to be the answer because it was such a normal staple in my life. But there was nothing else. There was nothing else in the equation that could be removed, Yeah, sure, like a couple of, bad behaviors. But when it came down to it, the most suboptimal thing that I was doing was drinking. And so I started from that point forward to be a little curious about what it might be like to drink a little bit less, drink less frequently. And doing the moderation thing was really a struggle for me. And so it did not come easily. There was always an excuse to drink. There was always an excuse to overdo it. So come January 1st, 2017, I decided, screw it. I've got it. Something's got to give. I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to take a break and see what happens. And then 7 years later, I'm like an expert in the alcohol-free space. So we can dive off from there.
Wow, what a story. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you started to answer a few questions that I had around, moderation, and if curious about if someone's interested in doing this, if you recommend cold turkey. And I'm sure everyone, like, it's not a linear and it's not straightforward black and white. Everyone's going to have their own experience with something like this, but it sounds like you really approached it from the mindset of like, I'm just going to take a break. And then that break, like, today's your 7-year anniversary. Yeah. Congrats, anniversary.
Thank you.
Your anniversary. And yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, I feel like this is kind of a trite question, but I'm just curious. Do you ever miss it? Do you ever feel nostalgic for it?
I don't. And it is so wild because it was such a staple. Like, I mean, I came of age in the age of Facebook where you had like quotes on your little Facebook profile. And so many of mine had to do with drinking. Like, time is never wasted if you're wasted all the time. Or I don't know, like really like party girl, like sorority girl stuff like this. And I just thought it was so like funny. And I, described myself as this wannabe Carrie Bradshaw. And what did Carrie Bradshaw do but have a Cosmo out with her girlfriends every night? And so it was really surprising to me that I didn't miss it. But I think that the thing that I decided, Tessa, was I came into this space, the alcohol-free space, where there weren't a ton of resources. And I kind of had to dig in my heels and just say, you know what? I don't see a lot of examples of anyone doing this. I don't know if I'm going to be successful and if it's really going to change my life, but I just kept feeling this deep sense that it was going to change my life. So I just had to listen to this intuitive voice inside of me that said, keep going. And so I kind of just had to be stubborn about it. And the further I got away from alcohol and the more really amazing, powerful experience I had navigating different life experiences, alcohol free, the more powerful I felt. And it's kind of like, I think that everyone probably resonates with having a breakup where you think you're just never going to get over the person and you're like pining over them and you're like checking their social media and you're thinking about them all the time and you're wondering if you're going to run into them. And then one day something happens and you're just over it and you're on. And that's kind of how I felt like I got to with alcohol very quickly is I just let the relationship go. And that felt like a really powerful place to be where I wasn't pining over it. I wasn't romanticizing it anymore. And that's what I would want for anyone. But it does take some people different paths to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I'm curious about knowing what you know now, having gone through that. Mm-hmm. Are there any tips and tricks for someone who's like, okay, I want to try this?
Mhm.
What are the common pitfalls? How do you approach social settings with that, without having that telltale beverage in your hand and feeling
Mhm.
like this might be an awkward situation? How do you approach stuff like that? How do
Mm.
you avoid those situations where it'd be really easy to reach for the drink when you're trying not to?
Oh, absolutely. Such a good question. And I think that everyone listening, like you're coming to this conversation at such a more accessible time. And especially in January, where this concept around dry January, taking the month off of alcohol, is very popular. And so a lot of people won't even bat an eye if you do it at this time of year, which I think is really lucky. But let's say you're in like June and you've decided, oh, you're just now hearing this episode and you're thinking, yeah, I want to do that. But how? It's not dry January. What will I do? And the first thing that I think you have to do is just decide and make it so. And, as I said, I tried to kind of dabble in moderation. I tried to cold turkey moderate. I tried to kind of ramp down my drinking. And for me, that just didn't work. And so I think for some people, that comes more natural. In fact, I often cite this article by Gretchen Rubin, and she talks in her article about moderators and abstainers. And moderators naturally moderate very easily. It's not something that they really have to think about. And I'm sure we all know people who do that. And it's really frustrating because we idolize it and we want to be that. But the fact of the matter is, some of us are more naturally abstainers, and that's me. I'm very all or nothing. So when I take something off the table and decide it's out of the picture, it's not an option. Wow, that just frees up so much mental space for me that it's astounding, and I don't struggle with it when it becomes a no. And so the first thing that I think that I would get really clear about is it possible that, and this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's actually really powerful to know this about yourself, that maybe you're just an abstainer and it would be easier for you to abstain for a period of time than trying to make moderation work for you. And if once you kind of play around with that terminology, I think the next thing is just to make it certain, make it so, and go into it with confidence, even if it's completely fake it till you make it confidence. And why I say that is because other people are going to feel uncomfortable with your decision to abstain from alcohol if they're not quite yet ready to have that conversation. And so sometimes people who have the best of intentions, and I'll give a really great example, they don't have language or terminology around it. And so they ask weird questions that make you feel uncomfortable, or they peer pressure you maybe a little bit. And it has so much to do with their discomfort. But if you approach the conversation with, hey, I'm confidently saying, I'm not drinking right now. I don't mind if you do, or I'm not drinking right now. Do you have any sparkling water? Or I'm not drinking right now. I'd be happy to be the sober driver later. Whatever it is, that it's just very matter of fact. This is the way that it is right now. And by the way, I'm happy about it. You're going to solve so many problems than if you kind of flounder through that conversation and hem and haw around why you're not drinking and make it seem like a bad deal. But at the end of the day, if you can just kind of have that fake it till you make it confidence around the decision that you're not drinking right now, people are much less likely to question you.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful, because oftentimes I do have friends, really good friends, who have played around with being sober. And I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I think the thing that I struggle with as a person who still drinks is that I feel like I might make them uncomfortable if I'm drinking and they're not.
Yeah.
So I love that tip of being like forthright and direct and just owning what your choice is. And that just leaves so much space for you to do you. And I know you're going to be able to take care of yourself, and I'm not going to inadvertently influence you in some way. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course.
So I want to just list out a few topics. I think we're already kind of touching on a few of them, but I'm curious if you have anything else to say about exploring sobriety and the effects on every major pillar of your life. And when I say every major pillar, I'm thinking about, we talked about navigating social situations, nurturing your relationships. You touched on this when you were talking about rediscovering your authentic self, like going through the meditations, going through manifestation, and still feeling like something was missing. And then another thing to touch on would be, how does it impact our career, our personal development, and that spiritual awakening, which connects back to authentic self.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go a little esoteric here because I think that it's an easier way to explain it than the very scientific way that most of us are probably very used to, which is like alcohol is poison. It's, ruining your body. And that's not false. That is definitely true. It's not good for you. There are no health benefits from alcohol. That's not the way that I operate. I'm not like a beat with a stick person. I'm a follow the dangled carrot person. And so for me, I like to think about it with the possibility that's available to you if alcohol is out of the way. And to understand that, you have to understand what alcohol does to you on the more like emotional, spiritual, and metaphysical level. And I always like to consider, why is it really that we drink? And some people, it's because, in very rare cases, I can get down to, I really do like the taste, or I like the culture behind wine. But typically we can steer back to a couple of reasons. And that is because we're trying to avoid a physical or emotional state that we think is weird, strange, not preferred, not socially acceptable. So we want to avoid being anxious. We want to avoid being stressed. We want to avoid being nervous. We want to avoid being antisocial, or we want to achieve a status in our body and our mind that we think is preferred. We want to achieve being outgoing. We want to achieve being conversational. We want to achieve being sexy. And if you're always ingesting something with a subtle desire to avoid or achieve something that you maybe think that you're shortcutting your way to, what you're doing is you're sending an internal message to yourself that you can't do it on your own, and you're also not good enough on your own. So every time we drink, what we're actually doing subconsciously is we're chipping away at our self-esteem. We're saying, hey, you're not enough, and you can't get there on your own, so you have to cheat to get there. You have to use this thing outside of yourself to get to these states. And that's not very empowering. When I think of it that way, those aren't the lessons or the messages that I want to be sending to myself. And of course, we're not doing this intentionally. It's not literally like, well, I guess I better have that wine because I'm not enough today, or, I'm not good enough to be social. But those are the subtle messages that we're sending, and those subtle messages matter. So when it comes to your everyday life, you're reinforcing these negative messages every time that you drink. And so it makes it a lot more difficult for us to have the self-esteem to go after the type of relationships that we want, for us to have the resilience to heal ourselves emotionally, for us to have the persistence to pursue the piece of the career that we want, or even the clarity to pursue what we want. I know so many people who have this, who am I to do this syndrome? And not that alcohol, taking it out of the way, just cures all of that, but it definitely opens up the path for you to work on these areas of your life so much more clearly. If you're operating from a clear vessel, getting at any sort of limiting belief that you have is going to be so much easier. And, just on the professional and on every level, it just gives you a competitive edge that can't be matched because most people aren't willing to remove this thing from their lives. So just imagine like what superpower you would have if you stopped doing one of the most socially acceptable habits in our world.
That's an interesting perspective shift. I've never thought about it like that, but I like that. Thank you. Yeah. I'm a fan of the esoteric as well as scientific. So I like that you started there with esoteric.
Yes, that's the way that I understand it best. Like the science stuff just doesn't I get it. Like, yeah, I believe it, but it doesn't, that's not my path of learning. So I have to explain it in the way that I best understand it.
Yeah. Well, and scare tactics often don't work in terms of like habit change, behavior change. Typically it's the positive, like think about classical conditioning, positive reinforcement that really affects lasting change.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about this. We touched on it when we were introducing you, and it's like the idea that you're not the problem. You don't have to have a problem or consider this an addiction for alcohol to be a problem in your life. I want to unravel this a little bit deeper. I mentioned when I was introducing you that you didn't hit quote unquote rock bottom. You didn't need a recovery program. It wasn't even like you were drinking every day or, drunk when you were trying to do X, Y, and Z thing. So I'd like to talk about this a little bit more in terms of, I guess.
Like, what does that look like? Well, let me give you some insight into what my life looked like at that point. I was checking all the boxes. No one would have looked at my life. Most people probably would have looked at my life and thought, wow, she's got it together. I had a master's degree. I had a great job. I had a new car, a new house, checking all the boxes. I was, a social butterfly. I was out on the C&B scene, with the C&B scene crowd, and everything looked like it was working out for me. And I, I wasn't drinking at a concerning level. I mean, sometimes very heavy for sure, like definitely binge drinking in some points, but it wasn't any different than any other young, successful go-getter was doing. And so this became really confusing for me when I started feeling drawn to go alcohol free. And I even, I Googled like how to know if you're an alcoholic, how to quit drinking if you are not an alcoholic. And I asked my therapist, and she kind of went through the scale for alcohol use disorder. And she's like, yeah, you don't meet the criteria. So maybe what if you just cut back? And it was such a weird moment having that conversation, because it exemplified to me that even health practitioners don't have a language around what it might be like to quit drinking void of an obvious, concerning, diagnosable problem. And it really just made being alcohol free feel inaccessible, because I didn't feel comfortable. I'd witnessed alcoholics growing up in my life, and I knew that the criteria for going to AA or 12 steps was, admitting that you were powerless over alcohol, even though there's this other philosophy that the only criteria to go is that you want to quit drinking, or your drinking has become unmanageable. And yes, but sobriety has become synonymous with AA, 12 steps in recovery. And because that didn't feel like, I felt like an imposter going into that process, I kind of was out here in no man's land all alone, understanding that alcohol was not helping me in my life, but feeling like if I quit, I would suddenly be a social outcast. And I really am on a mission to rewrite that narrative and not take anything away from the people who 12 steps recovery, alcoholism, alcohol use disorder, whatever those terms are that might resonate with some people. No disservice to that, but creating this other path where people who just want to live a better, healthier, more tuned in, more aligned, more authentic life can access, because there are different phrases. So now we're using phrases like alcohol free, like you said, sober curious, non-drinker. I use the phrase elective sobriety a lot to denote that, this is a path that I chose, not a path that I had to take. And I think that it's just really empowering to come to the stance that you don't have to have a problem with alcohol for alcohol to be creating problems in your life. And if you believe that alcohol is in any way stunting your growth, stunting your ability to show up, if it's interfering with your relationships, with your ability to tap into your spiritual connection, to be creative and inspired, or motivated to do your work, then it's definitely causing problems, even if it doesn't look like it on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the book, Unbottled Potential.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, when did you decide to write it? Was this just a natural part of the process? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we just said it came out in October of 2023, but I'm curious to hear more about your writing process and how the book came about.
Yes, I think this is such an important thing, because I know that so many people, probably a lot of your listeners, have a book on their heart. And I love to demystify the writing process, because truthfully, Tessa, it's a dream that I had since I was a kid, but I wasn't dreaming of writing self-help as a kid. I thought I was going to write like Babysitter's Club or Goosebumps or something like that. And I might still have a Babysitter's Club book in me, but I've always been a writer. I've always known that this is something I wanted to do. And I remember really early on in my alcohol-free process, I had been encouraged by a guy who I was dating at the time to start blogging, because he was like, you're doing something kind of revolutionary right now. I think he really just was encouraging me to share my story. And it really motivated me. So I started blogging. I started an Instagram account around this like wellness idea I had around sobriety, and it started catching on. And it was pretty quick after that I realized I have it. And of course, I'm not the only person or the first person to talk about sobriety in a non-recovery way. I actually have a whole row of books behind me of other authors who write in this space. But I was kind of one of the first people to talk about it in the way that I do, which is about opportunity, about possibility, about expansion, about leaning into your potential and using sobriety as a tool for self-discovery and personal development and spiritual alignment. And as I stepped more into the methodology in which the way that I was teaching, I realized, yeah, I definitely have a book in me. And so I remember when I still had my corporate job, I had aligned with this book coach, and she was really well renowned. She'd worked with some of the greats in the self-development and spirituality space, like Gabrielle Bernstein, a lot of people who I really admired. And I remember thinking, I'm going to work with this lady. And we had a call while I was on my lunch break, and I was in the car in the parking lot in my car. And I said, you know what, my idea is not quite yet ready, but I know that I'm going to work with you someday. And so mid 2020, mid lockdown, I thought, this is it. This is time. I have an infinite amount of time to write and work on this project. So this is go time. And I reached back out to that coach, and this was like a Tuesday, and she was like, the next Monday, I'm starting a program. I'm piloting a program to do exactly what you want to do. Do you want to join? And it wasn't like some sales gimmick. She literally was starting a program. It couldn't have been more serendipitous. So I'm like, yeah, I'm in. I'm doing this. And we worked together to crystallize my idea, created a book proposal, and shopped that proposal out to literary agents. And, that's kind of how the formal process goes. Of course, you can write a book and publish it yourself, but I really wanted to publish with a publisher, and I ended up getting the exact literary agent that I wanted, the exact book deal that I wanted. And fact of the matter is, all of this stuff came with such great ease. I don't think, obviously, I'm in a unique position where my book is about sobriety and living an alcohol-free lifestyle, but I know with certainty that I would not have been able to bring this dream to fruition, least of all as quickly and as easily as I did, if I wouldn't have gotten alcohol out of the way. So I think that my overarching lesson is, if you have a big dream on your heart like this, that, wow, you can really go further faster if you clear out your vessel, your spiritual and creative vessel. And yeah, so that's how it all came to be. I got very, very lucky that I'm talking about a hot topic that's kind of becoming much more popular right now. And it's been such a cool process. I'd love to, if there's anything else you want to know, I love, love, love to talk about book writing and publishing.
Yeah, well, I'm always curious to know that I've talked with different authors about their strategy around showing up to the desk each day to write, and whether that looks like I'm going to dedicate 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, or I spend 8 hours a day because I'm really going to pump this thing out, versus like, I'm going to book myself a writer's retreat for 2 weeks and go away and do that. I'm always curious to hear what people find works best for them.
Oh goodness. You said writer's retreat, and I saw that like glisten in your eye that we all get of like, I'm going to go off to a cottage or a cabin and I'm just going to sit there and write. And let me tell you what, Tessa, I did that 3 times. And it only worked once. And that was when I was down to the deadline and I had no choice but to crank out that book. Writing a book is like, I've not done an ayahuasca ceremony, but from what I understand, it is comparable. It is a just deep dive into your, as personal development book, at least. But I think that all books can be like this, because when you get a deal and you're under the pressure to actually produce the book, it's like all of your shit comes up. And all of a sudden you doubt the outline that you've submitted. You doubt you doubt the content. For me, I wanted to take my writing all these different ways. I was so in my own way trying to manipulate the process that it took me a while to get my footing. But what I finally landed on is that I had to determine what are my most productive creative hours of the day. And for me, that was from the time I woke up to about 2:00. And so I completely rearranged my schedule to make that pretty open time. And how could I take those hours where I was actually able to be creative and in my best thoughts, and use those for writing, regardless of what the structure looked like, and do everything else that could be a little more on autopilot, 2 p.m. and on. And that's what worked for me. I did have a really, really successful sprint. At the very end, I was fortunate to be able to go to Costa Rica and spend 2 or 3 weeks there. And that was my most productive time. Now, I don't know if that was deadline pressure or because Costa Rica, if you've ever been there, is just a beautiful and inspiring place, but that really did it for me. And I am happy to go back and try it again.
I love that. I was curious if you, when you started to write the book, when you got the book deal,
I still have my corporate job.
Yes.
No, I was able to actually Everything. I mean, Tessa, I can't tell you. I really believe that when I stopped drinking, that I became a magnet for manifestation, and so many serendipities came into my life. So I was able to leave my corporate job in the fall of 2019, which was so perfect because if I would have waited until spring of 2020 to leave that job, I would have been afraid. I would not have had the guts to do it. And everything just lined up to where I needed to leave in fall 2019. And so then I started pursuing the process of writing the proposal in spring 2020. And I got my agent the very first of 2021. So I started the proposal in 2020. I got my agent 2021, got my deal mid 2021, and then had that time to write from then on, and turned in the manuscript in January 2022. So yeah, I was very fortunate that I was not still straddling that, because I would have probably lost my mind if I was trying to do that as well. So I had fully moved over to my own coaching business. I also coach women who want to, high achievers who want to break up with alcohol. So that's what I was doing full time, which was very lucky. And it also became like the testing ground for how I was cementing my ideas that I was sharing in the book.
Yeah. Oh, what a great way to do both. And I mean, what fodder for research and inspiration for your book. You said something about having left your corporate job in 2019, and you were glad because had it happened in 2020, you would have been too scared. So the thing that I latched onto when you said that is the fear. And I think when I think about trying dry January, the thing that feels like it holds me back is the fear around that feels bigger than my ability to set alcohol aside completely, even though, like you, I don't consider myself an addict. It is something that I lean on in the evening. And I do feel like, there's a ritual around it, just like there's a ritual around my coffee in the morning, which, no surprise, those two couldn't go hand in hand. Stimulant and depressant. So in your work with other women, is there a common theme? I wonder how often fear comes up and what you say to women when it does.
Oh, so much, Tessa. It's like, fear is the thing that gets in our way the most. And whether it's just fear of who will I be, without alcohol, who will people like me? How will I deal with stress? I mean, there's so many fears that come up. I think that the social one is probably the biggest one. And the thing that I would welcome everyone to try on just to see as a thought experiment is, would it be possible that I could just lean into the faith that what if everything could be even better than I ever imagined if I would just kind of look fear in the eyes for 30 days, because 30 days isn't a tremendous time to take a break. And that's what I think really helped me at the beginning was I know that I can do this for 30 days. And if I can just see what it's like, then I'll be able to make an educated decision. But before then, I didn't have enough data. The only data that I had was taking a couple of breaks, maybe a week, 2 weeks max in the past. And I needed a different data set. So I had to change the variables in my experiment. And for me, that meant I had to go a significant amount of time without alcohol to even know. And I just really was stubborn, and that's just me. But I was stubborn, and I said, I have to see if I can do this, and I have to believe that I can. And that's what I would want you or anyone else to try on is, what is it that I'm really afraid of? And what is it that I need? And is it possible? Could I have enough faith that I can give myself that thing, that I don't have to have this routine, or I don't have to have this thing to calm me down? What if it was possible that I could do that for myself, and I could find a tool that would do that, that was much more sustainable? Does it mean it's as easy? No, but it's just leaning into that faith that there is something possible, that there could be, or it's possible that there could be another solution out there that was actually much more effective than the solution that I have right now. And it's not easy. It's not easy, Tessa, because it is the most socially acceptable cure-all for ailments big and small we have in our society. So I get it. I get the fear because I was there. And by the way, there was no one telling me that it wasn't absolutely true. Like everywhere I looked, there were just more examples of, you have to drink or you will be a social outcast. You have to drink or you will have no ways to cope. And my biggest desire is to be a way shower or a mirror for another way, because I think that if someone can see, oh, hey, there's a gal who looks kind of like me, who has a life that's really similar, who has dreams and ambitions and problems that are kind of like mine. And if she could do it, maybe I could do it too. And there wasn't anyone I could look up to at my point when I was deciding to quit drinking. And so I really, want to be someone who can answer those questions. So if you have any specific fears that are coming up right now that you're thinking, well, I don't think I can do dry January because of XYZ, I am happy to go to battle with them with you.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
So the first one that comes up is, that's kind of a crutch that I'll fall back on in the evening when I want to be cozy, especially this time of year when it's like rainy and cold and dark outside. I want to snuggle up with a good book and a good glass of wine. And that's part of my wind down routine. So I wonder what could I replace it with that would feel good, nourishing, cozy?
That's a great question. That's a super common nighttime routine. And when we get into routines, like you said, it just becomes secondhand for our second nature for us. And so there are a couple of different ways that I like to approach this. And the first is, would just substituting it with like a cozy glass of, tea or a mocktail or something else satisfy you? And some people it does, but some people it's, like when they say like, oh, if you want something sweet, just have a couple strawberries. And I'm like, no, I want chocolate. Like that's not going to satisfy me. And I'm just going to obsess over chocolate until I actually have it. So I might as well just have the chocolate. So some people substitutes work really well for, and for some people it's absolute bullshit. So really recognize which one you are and don't try to trick yourself, because then you're just going to be that much more frustrated. The other option is to switch up your routine completely so that you are choosing a different path and see if that works for you. So maybe taking a warm bath and reading a book. I am very pro. I'm a read fiction after 5 p.m. That's my favorite thing to do. Like I am book club all the way. So I don't want to tell you to take that part of your routine away. But what if you switched up the location and where you did it? Or maybe it's something that you're trying to shut off something in your mind and you haven't quite identified what that is, that you want to leave the stress of the day behind. So what if before you read, you took a shower and you really envisioned all of that stress, and this is easier said than done, I know, but you envision that stress melting off your body and you take about 20 minutes and you journal or you meditate and you really ask yourself, what is it right now that I am trying to forget or try to get out of my mind? And what if I just gave some attention to it? So, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I have all these things that I'm responsible for. What if you just jotted those things down instead of trying to retain them in your mind or forget them or push them to the back of your mind? What if you just allowed them a little bit of presence and a couple of moments of your time so that then they could be on paper, they're safe, they're not going anywhere. And now you can allow yourself to check out. Maybe it's doing some yoga or some movement, but sometimes it is taking a little more effort to wind down than trying to do the quick shut off that wine gives us or a cocktail gives us. And it requires more work. I will say that it does require more work. And after you get into that routine, it becomes so much more effective and also kind of empowering. Like, oh, I can do this by myself. I can do this for myself. And that feels really cool too.
Yeah. Thank you. I like the invitation to completely change up the routine. Although I will experiment, and in terms of my work around health coaching and food related things, the thing that scarcity mentality of I'm taking something away, so I need to replace it with something else typically does work for me with food specifically. Yeah. I kind of agree with you though, that I would probably need a complete, routine change to make the alcohol piece work for me, because it's such an easy fix.
Yeah.
A bath takes time.
I could almost envision you sitting there I know when I get in this space that I'm I just need whatever it is that I want and I can't focus until I have it. So you have this inner adolescent rebel coming up, and sometimes instead of trying to trick it, we just need to go in a different direction and distract it kind of with something different. And that's powerful that you know that about yourself, because we don't want you getting into this space where you're just frustrated and you're white knuckling it and you're gritting through your teeth. What if you could do something that was a little bit of a distraction to your normal routine that could help you get over that hump of time?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. This is kind of a topic change, but you said fiction after 5 and you're huge into reading novels, and so am I. That just lit me up. So I was curious if you're reading anything right now that's really good.
I am. Okay. So I have a lot of, so my rule is, and this is actually, this is my secret trick to get everyone on my personal book club is that so many of the clients that I work with are like you, Tessa, that they're super high achievers. They got a lot going on. And so I'll ask, well, what are you reading? And they'll like beam with pride. And they're like, well, I'm reading like I'm reading Atomic Habits or whatever like self-help book is popular. I'm like, okay, put that to the side. Read that in the morning. That's great. Read that when your mind is awake. But at night, your mind is trying to wind down. And so we want to read something like creative and fantastical. And like, so I have fiction after 5 is my rule. And I usually read very lighthearted fiction. So right now I'm on like a Christmas, like Hallmark Miracle type kick that I'm reading a holiday. I'm just finishing up a holiday kind of fantasy kick, but my favorite book, if I were to like recommend something to anyone of the past 2 years, has been this book called Night Circus. And it's just really whimsical and really well written. And I think it is just one of the most beautiful books that I've ever read. And so if you haven't read The Night Circus, I really recommend it.
It keeps coming up. I'm part of, have you heard of Book of the Month?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That keeps coming up in my rotation as a recommendation.
It's one of my top 5 books of the past couple of years. It's so good. That, and then I also read The Wishing Game, which is kind of similar. Typically, I read like lighthearted, romantic kind of comedy stuff, but those 2 books kind of defy that genre. So Night Circus and The Wishing Game were both really just whimsical and beautiful. I just loved both of them for different reasons. What about you? Do you have one that is like your consummate go-to recommendation?
Well, right now I'm reading a really good book, although I wouldn't say it's whimsical. Well, there is a little whimsy in it, but it's a very big book, and it's also there's a lot of tragedy and heartbreak in it. Although it's almost got that flavor of like adventure and journey and a coming of age story, and it's called This Tender Land. And I believe the author, gosh, I'm gonna forget his name. I think it's William Kurt Kruger.
Okay.
It's something like that. But the title of the book is This Tender Land. It's very,
down.
very good. But it's one of those books that you kind of have to like, for those moments where it can be triggering if you have childhood trauma or if you've experienced any kind of trauma in your life, it can be triggering.
Okay.
Although it's worth it.
Yeah. So maybe that's for me an afternoon read, not quite after 5. I definitely try to keep it very lighthearted before bed because I don't want my mind reeling with super dramatic or traumatic things right before I go to sleep. So I try to keep it pretty lighthearted, but that sounds like one I would love though. It's, I do love something that just really takes you to an emotional place, which is the power of a book. I think it's just so much more powerful for me than television or movies. I think it's just one of my favorite things to do, and definitely a hobby that I've explored more since I quit drinking. I just make so much more time for it.
Yeah. I love that. That's so inspiring. Yeah. So the last question I want to ask you is, so you got your new book out. Well, your first book out. This is your first book, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, your life's just taken this dramatic change over the past few years. And what's anything that you're excited about next? What are you looking forward to this year?
I think that I'm just figuring out what it's like to be an author. And I think that there's going to be so many things that I can't even anticipate that are on my vision board that are going to come to fruition. So like Oprah, if you hear this, I'm waiting for you, girl. I'm practicing for you. But I know that there's another book in me, and I can't wait until I have just a little bit of space so I can start putting that idea on paper, because I feel really excited just to keep writing. But right now, I just want to also give this book baby that I birthed into the world its due respect and really spend some time nurturing it and making sure the people who need to want to read it, that it gets out in front of them. And so I am really just enjoying having all of these conversations with new friends like you, Tessa, that this book has given me the opportunity to go out and speak and share a message that, geez, I really wish that someone would have been talking about this 10 years ago when I was looking for a path that resonated with me. So really just enjoying connecting with new people that are just now coming across my work and my book. And it's just, a big part of my purpose in this world. It's not about the things that go around with it. It's about finding those people who look at me and say, I feel like you wrote this book for me. And I did. I wrote this for whoever it is who finds it that needs to see themselves in my teachings. And I feel like that's been just really powerful and fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us. It's been such an honor to share some time with you. What's your favorite place to connect with people on the socials?
Oh, I think Instagram. I'm getting behind TikTok. I finally jumped on board, but Instagram is my OG place to connect. So if you are looking for me, if this resonated with you, I'm at Amanda Kuda on Instagram, and I just love to connect and hear other people's stories too.
And are you still keeping up the blog?
Mm-hmm. I am, not as much as I was. I was blogging like every single week. I mean, I was just really going for it. And now I have a podcast and other mediums that I'm exploring. So I'm not blogging as much, but it is still, I mean, I'm a writer at heart. So it's something so like that I'm so passionate about, and I love to share in that way.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, podcast is another kind of form. It's
It
not
is.
blog per se, but it's a similar form of
Totally
sharing information.
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. Blogging is very different than podcasting.
Yeah.
Well, Amanda, anything else you want to share? Any final words, key takeaways for listeners today?
Yeah, I think that if you made it this far and something that you heard resonated with you, that if you have, we call it sober curiosity, if you have a curiosity around sobriety, that it's only going to keep like nagging at you until you give it its due exploration. And for me, that is doing something so simple like taking a 21-day or 30-day break and then reassessing where you are from there. And I think that if you have a curiosity, no matter what it is, you owe it to yourself to explore it. And so if this is one of your curiosities, I would be so honored to be a guide or an inspiration in any way for you to explore it and give it its due time.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you, Amanda.
Of course. Thanks, Tessa.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.